My practice explores where crafts can exist within art, using painting as a generative process to produce material to be manipulated by crafts such as weaving, knitting, and sewing, questioning the relationship between painting, materiality, and crafts. I'm interested in how crafts can be used as an activity as opposed to a means of production in itself, and how this can be conveyed or portrayed. Well, crafts became more of a thing in my practice in second year when I would tear old paintings and weave them back together again, interested in how something like weaving could be used to transform an object from one state to another, in this case a painting into something that resembles a rug. I would attempt to do this in various ways, and sometimes taking apart the painting by thread and weaving it back together thread by thread, choosing against it due to the time it consumed, or attempt to apply the fabric that I'd produced from my paintings to other objects such as chairs to try and repair them. I used this chair in my studio for quite a bit, and this idea of transformation was enhanced by a change in function. I found it in a back alley and I repaired it with what little knowledge I knew about woodwork. I tried it again with this chair. This was more damaged, it was missing legs. I tried repairing it with pieces of an oiled loom. You can see the notches on the leg. Ultimately, it became a loom in itself then, a narrow loom, and the first loom I would use to weave the first sort of wearable art I'd produced, that being the mask. The mask is the first example I have of weave the clothing onto my face in this case. These are tools that I'd made after learning increasingly obscure crafts, and these tools I had to make myself because I couldn't really buy them. They weren't really popular. I mean, there's a hooky, and nail binding needles. The curved one's the best one. It's carved from a deer antler. A pair of knitted gloves I'd made from the individual threads of the painting by spinning it into a string that could then be knitted. For the bad gloves, they'll irritate your skin because of the oil drenched fibres, and they won't keep your hands warm, but it's sort of the furthest I could take this material of the painting away from its original state by putting it through this convoluted process of deconstructing, spinning, then knitting. This is the first painting I made that was intended to be destroyed. This was problematic as, conceptually speaking, the same transformation doesn't occur. It's material to art object rather than painting to art object. This would mark a change in how I would make and present work, shifting the focus from look what I've done to look what I'm doing. Blank woven coat is the first step towards this attitude of making as an activity, where I would weave this blank coat, and painting myself while wearing the blank coat was different. I couldn't see what I was doing. While painting myself, the canvas would also shrink, being raw canvas, so it would also restrict my movements as I continued to paint, and as it got more and more wet and more covered in acrylic, it would become more rigid as it dried. So the video of painting myself became just as much about negotiating with this material on my body as it was about painting myself. In this coat, I was also inserting myself into the artwork my body became the stretcher for the canvas, which would dissolve the boundaries between artist, subject, and media by presenting them all as one in an attempt to show what had actually happened to produce this object in its painted state. It was later then deconstructed and recycled into other works. Following this, lockdown would happen, and I was removed from the studio without access to my loom. Following this, I would try to construct makeshift looms in my parents' house where I was staying at the time, wherever I could. This is a Navio loom, and that's a backstrap loom. They were never quite enough for me, so I would keep on going, and no longer really concerned with using the loom to produce material. I would start using the loom as a sculptural object that could be fitted onto my body, like with the painting coat before. And also taking inspiration from the traditional backstrap loom. These are examples of various body looms that I did make, and they all have various levels of success. Using the loom as a sculptural object also sparked an interest in using other craft processes to generate other sculptural objects that could fit onto my body. Here I was using coil weaving and combining it with weaving to produce these masks that had shapes beyond my own head. On top of this, new materials other than painted canvas were beginning to work their way into my work. Here are willow shoots, and this is cotton yarn knitted on to cover my face and the structure. It was much more about combining various crafts and processes and activities to produce these objects now. I include the images of items that I have knitted. I think it's relevant because these knitted materials are becoming increasingly more present in my practice for various practical reasons, like being able to produce a number of different fabrics of varying thicknesses and densities, and independent of the material used. I'm interested in the patterns that I can make and how they can interact with each other on the body, using this to produce artworks like this one here, where the white marks represent 30 minutes of work. So it's a means of documenting how, or one aspect of how this work is produced as the product of the work in itself. Others I'll embroider and try to change it as often as possible to have this thing that's constantly shifting. And the ideas of weaving gaps shut was something that first emerged in my actual practice. These examples of this can be seen in this costume here with the trousers and the sides of the body, and also in the videos that I produced to document this process. Like here with the trousers and the mask, and I was really interested in conveying how my own body can become, well, parts of my body can be used to generate or fill these gaps in the material and produce these new objects, such as trousers or a mask. I would later then begin to edit the backgrounds of these videos and insert images of the paintings that would become the costumes. So it became much more about creating this environment for them. It became much more about creating this environment for this activity to occur in, and how I would potentially interact with it and become part of this space that I digitally produced through video editing.